Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Dhammāṃ saranang gacchāmi, Sanghaṃ saranang gacchāmi. Dutiyampi Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Dutiyampi Dhammāṃ saranang gacchāmi, Dutiyampi Sanghaṃ saranang gacchāmi. Tatiyampi Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Dhammāṃ saranang gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Sanghaṃ saranang gacchāmi. So nice to see everybody here today. Another Tuesday. And today we tried a different meditation technique. Went through each of the 4 Brāhmaviharas. And these are actually a meditation topic that figures really prominently in the canon. So quite often in the canon, these are very frequently mentioned. Mentioned as counters to defilements. And they get their name from this god Brahma, who in ancient India at that time was said to be the creator of the world. So Brahma, the thing about him is he's always depicted with these kind of 4 heads, kind of looking in these 4 directions. And his mind is said to be characterized by these 4 qualities. It's kind of Mettā, it's kind of unlimited goodwill for all beings, and Karuna, it's kind of unlimited compassion for all beings, and Mudita, it's kind of unlimited empathetic joy for all beings, and Upekkha, it's kind of unlimited equanimity for all beings. That's an interesting one. And so all of these qualities, these kind of qualities, when one develops them, one's said to develop the mind of a Brahma, kind of a Brahma mind. It's kind of a very beautiful mind. Yeah? And these kind of qualities actually bring a lot of goodness, a lot of positive energy, a lot of positive feeling into one's own life if one practices them. Actually, a lot of what we might call the gross types of mental defilements, they're directly countered by these Brāhmaviharas, by the feelings they bring up. And they're a nice kind of a calm topic of meditation, kind of one that doesn't require a lot of tension in the body or anything like that. It's kind of spreading these feelings. And so this is especially the case for one, if each of them is said to have counters for specific types of defilements that arise in people's minds. So the first one, Mettā, that's a counter for hatred. And I remember I was kind of skeptical, like, that's all? To counter hatred. And when I was in Thailand, there's many kind of very renowned meditation masters, and I would ask them all these questions about kind of hatred. It's kind of so this or that, is it this or that? And it's like this Mettā. And I remember there's one monk, it's one of the interesting things. You can hear the same thing from many people, but then somebody who you really revere, or whoever, somebody says something to you one time and it kind of sticks. And I remember I was asking him all these questions about conquering hatred, and he answered them. And at the end he's like, but Mettā, that's the way to conquer hatred. That's really how to do it. It's really all there is to it. And when we first have these kind of emotions arising frequently, especially something like a kind of a hatred, it's kind of a dislike for various people, it's not necessarily a wish that they meet with harm, although that can go in there. It's this sense of just not liking, somebody. This kind of ill will, just this kind of black, unwholesome, smog-like quality. This can arise towards all kinds of people in all kinds of situations, which is why it's interesting that it can seem like Mettā, just spreading these thoughts, doesn't actually counter it. So usually when these kind of thoughts of hatred arise, we have this main thought, main thing that we know usually causes us to feel this intense dislike. If we're that character, some people have like very little hatred or anger at all. It's kind of, that's their character. And when these kind of thoughts arise, it's like kind of having a kind of, often we have this kind of defense set up. Like we know, if we start to practice, we know this kind of situation brings up these thoughts of hatred. And so we learn to spread Mettā to the people or the people in this situation, or if it's a particular person, to that person and all beings. And if we do this consistently, like it can't just be when that situation arises. You know, it's kind of like, you know, a person who's preparing to do battle or have a war, they stock up all their munitions first, like not when the enemy's there, they don't start making preparations. You know, so beforehand, doing all these things. And then when we do this, we're set up for that situation. We realize that, okay, I've been spreading all this Mettā, now this has less of an effect. There's a kind of preparation, you know? Especially if we know there's somebody or some situation, traffic or internet, I don't know. Everybody has these kind of like things that just trigger them and make them feel this like intense, or not everybody, you know, people have these things. It's different for each person. And sometimes it can seem kind of comical, you know, kind of people have their like pet peeve, you know. I think I've talked before about, I've got this one friend and you're with him in traffic and you don't even notice anything's going on, but he's like getting incredibly angry. You know, it's like, oh buddy, this guy just cut me off. I've known him for a really long time. We kind of grew up, you know, we're friends since we were kids. Kind of driving down the street, he's like, oh, what's up with Buddy? You know, what's he doing? Buddy's there he's in the light. What's going on? You just see him. Like, the more you drive with him, like the more angry he gets. Like, it kind of starts off this kind of normal level of anger, and the more he talks about these people on the road, the more like incredibly enraged he becomes. He kind of doesn't notice it. And of course, that kind of spreads out into other aspects of our life, you know. So this is the thing, we have this kind of thing, this kind of rage towards traffic, rage towards when people make particular comments about us, about our particular characters, about our facial features, about our family, about our ethnicity, about our country, whatever it is. Sometimes these things can be a trigger and somebody says it and this feeling of rage, you know, arises towards this person or whatever it is. When we have that, we recognize what it is. This is actually something that causes us intense suffering. This is the first step to practicing Mettā meditation, to realize that whenever anger arises, whatever form it comes in, it's not a good thing. It's not a self-defense mechanism that's, you know, maybe it's evolutionarily evolved, who knows, but it's not a good thing. Whatever it is, when we're angry, we can't deal with situations effectively. It's very difficult, you know. Somebody's angry, they just want to they go berserk and just want to smash things out of existence. It doesn't work. You know, people do this with their keyboards. I had a relative and she was trying to download something and her computer stopped working. She got so angry, it's just like smashed her keyboard. Okay, you know, you got angry, the computer didn't do what you wanted. Now your keyboard doesn't work too. Now you've got a broken keyboard on top of your problem with your software. You've now got a hardware problem from smashing up your keyboard. Now this is a source of suffering for people. You know? Seems really comical, like, yeah, you smashed up her keyboard. But that actually goes underground. It's kind of like one of these rivers. You see it kind of, you know, coming out, gushing out, like kind of one of these hot springs, you know. That has a huge underground source to it sometimes. In the same way, these kind of feelings of hatred we feel towards something we think is very funny, it goes underground and comes up in various ways. It's a source of suffering. If anything, it means we can't drive calmly in traffic, or we can't use computers. Sometimes it's a huge hindrance. These are common things people have to do every day, and something very common becomes this terrible source of suffering for us. It doesn't need to be that way. So when we have these kind of things that are constantly coming up, we learn to set up a guard against them. In other words, we know this source of hatred is going to come up, and we practice Mettā. in that situation. We recognize this is a source of suffering for us. You know? Now, when we do that, we have this kind of block against hatred for this situation. I remember this kind of, there was a story about the Japanese or the British in World War II. And they knew the Japanese were going to invade this island. I can't remember what island they had. And so they set their cannons up, pointing towards the ocean, because the Japanese had to invade by ship. And not only did they set those cannons up, they put them in concrete. I guess cannons have a lot of kickback, you know. But then you put them in concrete, you can't move them. And so they're all prepared, you know, they're waiting for the Japanese to come by ocean. And what the Japanese actually did was they circled around behind and landed on the other side of the island and came up. And the British couldn't turn their cannons around, kind of set in stone. So that battle they didn't win. But that can be the way it is with Mettā as well. We think, geez, I'm still getting angry and I'm practicing Mettā. Why is that? You know? Sometimes one of the reasons can be is we have this setup for this thing we know throws us off, but there are actually ways in which this feeling of intense dislike arises that we've got our cannon set in stone for, and that we're not watching out for. You know? And it's not necessarily something we notice right away. This is the insidious thing about the defilements. Some of these things that we think that are defilements that cause us to suffer, they get integrated into the way we work, the way we interact with the world, and then we don't notice them. Just kind of there, like this underground river that pops up in various places that we do notice. You know? So when we start to practice these Brāhmaviharas, we learn to keep a watch, not just for the things that usually trigger us in hatred, trigger us in anger, but for the things we don't notice, the things we think are innocuous, the things we think are small. Those things sometimes have a huge underground source to them, you know? Like, okay, that's okay, I get angry on the phone with this guy, you know? Or with these customer service people, because that gets me my order, you know, more quickly. That's like one of these hot springs coming up that has an underground source. It links out, you know? So when we set up this Mettā, we spread goodwill to all beings. We also set up a guard in all directions to protect our feelings of Mettā, you know, in all ways. Wherever anger arises, this is a hindrance. And this goes against some of the teachings or some of the preconceived ideas we might have in the West, where it's like anger is a protection. Anger makes us strong. Anger gives us the ability to defend ourselves when somebody is coming at us. All these things are not true, actually. Anger attracts people to attack us. I actually was walking in the underground path the other day, and there's this portion where you have to turn it becomes this very narrow corridor. Most of it is this kind of very wide open area. And as I turned, there's this narrow corridor and there's another sharp turn. So all the people coming in this direction have to turn, and you don't have much time to see them, you know? So I was walking and I turned the corner, and there was a woman in front of me, and I saw this guy. And so it's probably about the distance from that chair to the door. And this guy was kind of walking like, like this. And then he sees me and this woman, and he goes, and I'm thinking, okay, what's going to happen? So now like the distance is like from here to here between us, because it's a very short distance, and we're all walking. And, you know, the convention is you walk on the right-hand side so that, you know, other people walk on their right-hand side and you don't bump into each other. But this guy, he turned into the right-hand lane, I guess you call it, and he just starts walking like, oh, God, kind of looking, you know, very, very angry. And so I was thinking, oh, my God, what's this going to, is he going to just bowl over this woman and, like, smash her into the wall? But that wasn't the case. The woman, she passed by. But then he sees me, and now we're, like, this close, you know? And I'm a man, so men don't treat men the way they treat women. So now he's like, like, you know, just staring me down, and his arms are really wide. And there was a gap like this wide, you know, between me and this guy, you know. And there's two courses of action here. Actually, I mean, this is my lane, you know. I could have shoulder smashed him. He was bigger than me, you know, but I've done I've done martial arts. Maybe, who knows, you know, maybe he was a smoker, you know. That would have been to his disadvantage, but I might have ended up with a criminal record. But anyways, what I ended up having to do was squish against the wall, and I have this very big bag that I put my coat in, and I kind of held it out. It's like, okay, you'll hit the bag, you won't hit me. And this guy just kept moving. He didn't move over at all. And he kind of just, boom, and he hits my bag. And so after he hit my bag, I kept walking, and that was the end of the story. No more story to it other than that. And he went on his way, and I went on my way, and I continued on. And if a person is spreading Mettā and has a lot of Mettā in their heart, I have to admit, I was kind of annoyed, like, why did this guy bump me? But, whatever, that is what it is. But you see, like, the minds of people who've done this for a long time, something like that happens to them, and it's no big deal. Well, my bag got bumped. That was the end of that story. Sometimes even these people get, like, knocked down by somebody, and they just kind of stand up and keep going. And that was the end of the suffering for them, And if we're angry, a very angry person, kind of this guy smashes us, it's like, what are you doing? And you probably have a fight on your hands right there. Maybe this guy just got out of jail, or he looked like he was itching for a fight with somebody, so there would have been a fight. And whether you win or lose a fight like that, whenever you get into a fight, like a physical encounter with somebody, it stays in your mind for a very long time after that. It doesn't leave your mind. This kind of anger stays for a long time. These kind of feelings of Mettā are protection. Even somebody coming at you very angrily, like the worst they do is they knock you down, and then you get up again and you kind of continue on your way. Most of the time, very angry people are looking for a retaliation. That's what they're looking for. So this is a kind of protection. And the counter for feelings of ill will, or feelings of what they call harming, is Karuna. It's kind of learning to spread feelings of empathetic joy or compassion. Compassion in all directions. Now this might seem like something that most people don't have. It's kind of a wish that people suffer. But actually this wish is kind of very subtle. It can be subtle as well, or gross. It's kind of this joy at people's suffering. This joy can come in a lot of ways. It can come when we do better than somebody and somebody does worse than us. This is actually a huge cause of suffering for us. If we don't have this sense of compassion, sense that we don't want people to suffer. And actually, most of the humor on TV is people suffering. Something really terrible happens to somebody, and it's really hilarious. Now this kind of thing, this kind of desire for people to suffer, goes out into our life when we have it. In other words, when somebody does worse than us, we feel a subtle sense of happiness. And actually, I kind of notice this even sometimes with people who are dedicated to helping other people. I've known people who really love to give to downtrodden people. But then the interesting thing sometimes with these people is they're happy if those people do well, but they're also happy that they're not doing well in a sense. They're happy that there's people for them to give things to help out. And then sometimes these people don't like getting help themselves. In other words, it's denigrating for them to receive gifts, but not denigrating to give them. It's kind of happiness that you're giving, the other person is receiving, And then sometimes if a person is in this situation where they're kind of giving to somebody, they become unhappy if that person does better than them. In other words, this guy was really low, now he's done better, But this is another one of these defilements that branches out in many ways and comes back to attack us. So when we start to practice meditation a lot, we start to want to, restrain the defilements in our mind. We start to notice this little voice that whenever we're trying to do something good, it's trying to get us to do something bad, In other words, we sit down we come into a really nice place and we have this like evil thought. Comes out of nowhere. You should do this, This thought is often tied to this very small feeling of joy. In other words, this joy that we get in seeing other people suffer turns around and becomes a kind of emotion that builds up when we're trying to do something good. It turns around to attack us in subtle ways. And this is one of the reasons why we can see sometimes this tendency that people have to kind of self-harm. This kind of desire, not to like suicidal self-harm necessarily, but so things are going really well for people, it seems like, and all of a sudden, for some reason, they need to make them go terrible. Like nothing's going wrong, but all of a sudden people need to make it go wrong. You can see this quite often. Actually, I had a friend who was doing really successfully. He had a really successful business, and he had this partner, and they were making a lot of money. And all of a sudden, his partner just started fighting with him for no reason, kind of getting along well and things. And then my one friend, if you'll pardon my language, he was like, well, that's the way it is. He's like, some people just need to see everything go to shit. Sorry for using that word, but that was what he said. And there was a lot of wisdom in it. This kind of desire for people to feel harm spreads out when we feel the desire to harm ourselves. It becomes subtle. It becomes this kind of subtle navigation where we navigate our lives into situations where everything has to go to shit. It doesn't have to be that way. We learn to have this feeling of compassion to all beings, wishing that they not suffer. That comes back to us. We also, this little voice that's like, oh, do this evil thing, these evil thoughts that pop up that cause us to grab onto them and harm ourselves, they become more muted. They become something we don't follow as much. So this is the advantage of having these feelings of compassion. And it's the same, another thing with empathetic joy. Often in society today, growing up, we're taught that competition is a virtue. And the same thing, we say somebody, this guy's a really competitive person, and it means it's a good thing. This guy's in a kind of match, and he does everything he needs to do to win. But actually, this kind of competitive attitude causes us a great deal of suffering. What it essentially means is that we want to do better than somebody else. We want that person to do worse than we are doing. And this again spreads out into all aspects of our life, all aspects of a person's relationships with others. So I remember there was this kind of famous actor and actress couple, and they ended up getting a divorce, and it seemed like it was pretty sad. But one of the reasons for it when they were talking was that each time one of their careers started to take off, the other one would get really jealous and start to dislike that. In other words, this kind of feeling of competition spreads out even into the people who are close to us. We start wanting the people who are around us to do worse. Now, when we're surrounded with people who are doing badly, guess what that means? It's very likely that we ourselves will start to do bad at whatever it is. We're surrounded by a bunch of people who are doing really terrible in life, and we're slightly better than them. Chances are, our life is not going to end up being that good, just slightly better than the people who are doing terrible. And all these things sound very comical, but actually they're very real ways that these feelings of joy, when we do better than somebody, can hamper us, can turn around and bite us. So we learn to have this feeling of happiness. When somebody is doing well, may you do well. And similarly, we can set up a guard for this in the main ways it throws us off. If there's somebody who we feel particularly jealous of, maybe somebody who's always done better than us at everything, we learn to spread feelings of goodwill to them. May you continue to do well. And then with this kind of feeling of empathetic joy, compassion, metta, we also develop humility. We can go to the people who do well and ask them for advice. And that raises the bar for us. It takes away quite a lot of the suffering that we feel in life. And then the final one of these is this feeling of equanimity. In other words, this evenness towards all beings and all phenomena. In other words, whatever is there is there. That's how it is. It's subject to the laws of karma. It's the owner of karma. Even phenomena can be viewed this way. This is just the way this phenomena is. Not being attracted to it or repelled by it. Learning to identify more with the aspect of the mind that just watches things. This kind of aspect, this kind of consciousness. It just knows when something's here, when something's there. Something's black, red, white, it knows that. Somebody hates us, we know that. Somebody does well, we know that. They do poorly, we know that. this feeling of evenness towards all things. Now, all these other three Brāhmaviharas, they're things where we're actually actively hoping for good things for people. But one of the things is that all people, all phenomena, they're subject to kamma. In other words, we can't do everything for people. At most, we can try to help them in various ways, but it's their choice, in the end, how they want to live their life. And that's not just the case in a free society. It's their choice how they want to direct their mind. It's their responsibility. We can't do it for them. So no matter how much we might want a person or a situation to be a particular way, if the conditions that have arisen have caused it to be in a certain way, it's not possible for us to change that sometimes. And so what that means is there's certain things that we just have to accept. Past a certain point, we've tried our best to help somebody, they're unwilling to do what's necessary to help themselves. That's it. We have to have this evenness towards them. This is their choice. This is their kamma. It's their kind of fate. They've made this destiny for themselves, and I can't do anything about it. So in other words, it saves us from having this, what they call falling down the well type of kamma or kindness. In other words, we go to help somebody from falling down a well, and they pull us in. Actually, I knew there was one person who I used to get rides with a lot, and it's a very sad story, but his son, here in Scarborough, went to save one of his friends who was drowning in a pond, and that friend grabbed onto him, and when somebody's drowning, they don't let go of things, and they both drowned, his son and this other young boy. And so we need to have this kind of wisdom as well, that there are situations where if we keep trying to change them, they're going to pull us down. That's how it'll be. This is often the case when somebody dies, when we really want something to happen in our life and it's not happening. If we keep grabbing to it, it will drown us in certain situations. So this is why this feeling of equanimity is very important. I'm also kind of suspicious, I've never experimented with, but I think it might be a counter to anxiety, which is kind of very pervasive in society these days. A lot of people have anxiety. So if this is the case, I don't know people's minds, but you can try experimenting with that. I don't know, but it's just a suspicion. It might help. So in other words, these four Brāhmaviharas are very important qualities of mind to have. They're things which counter many of the various gross defilements that we see in our life. And if we have them, if they're well established in our minds, then we're happy. Become kind of happy people, like a person's mind who has these, who's cultivated them a lot, their mind becomes very bright. Actually, even if you're around people who've cultivated these a lot, just seeing them makes you very happy. Actually, I saw one of my friends today. I've known them for a long time, kind of Sri Lankan. And when I first came to the city, I didn't know anybody. Like I knew people from when I was a layman, but I didn't know very, very few Buddhists in the city. I knew almost nobody at all. And it was completely obvious to me that these people went out of their way in every possible way to help me. Even they would email me like every 2 or 3 days just to shoot the breeze. Oh, how's it going? Because I was just alone. At that time I had kind of stomach problems, other health problems, and they were kind of concerned for me. And it made a huge impression on me, actually. Kind of growing up in the West, I'd never seen like a stranger, per se, just go out of their way in every way they could to help me like that, And when I saw them today, they were telling me more stories of like all these people they just went out of their way to help, to do good things for. And just seeing them and hearing them talk about those things made me very, very happy. So in all these ways, these Brāhmaviharas are good. We learn to cultivate them, we become happy. We become people whose minds are well established in these things. Other people who value good things, they become happy. In other words, it's a win-win-win situation. Now the drawback, of course, that the Buddha often talks about, they're not enough to completely cut defilements. But they're very good things to cultivate. Very good things to make a basis for one's mind. Because a person who has these things is bright, has a bright mind, a happy mind. And that follows them so long as they have the Brāhmaviharas, and so long as they don't lose them.